Think of the adulterous pastor who campaigns for family values. Or think of the drug-taking sports star who portrays a spotless image to the sponsors. Or think of the socialist MP who sends her children to the most expensive and exclusive prep schools. The world despises leaders who don't practice what they preach. And so does Jesus. In fact, Jesus leads the way in the condemnation. Let me read Matthew chapter 23 from verse 1. Hold on to your hats. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so you must obey them and do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for men to see. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. They love the places of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted in the marketplaces and to have all men call them Rabbi." These words from Christ would have fallen like asteroids onto the cultural and religious scene of his day. Jesus is opening fire on the holiest people that these Jews had ever seen. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees were the best of the best. They are the greatest Bible scholars, the strictest moral leaders. It was the teachers of the law and the Pharisees who chastised the culture from the vantage point of the religious right. But somehow Jesus kind of outflanks them, and not so much from the right, but from above. The assembled crowd would have been astounded, and the teachers of the law and the Pharisees would be choking with righteous indignation. Who does this upstart think he is, having a go at us? Yet Matthew chapter 23 sees Jesus delivering the sharpest volley of criticism seen anywhere in the Gospels. And who is on the receiving end of this sharp volley of condemnation? Is it the tax collectors that he's preaching against? Is it the prostitutes, the Samaritans, the Romans, the sinners? No, it's the religious. Here is the prophet par excellence, doing what prophets do best, uncovering the pretensions of religious leaders. It is public, it is sharp-tongued, it is brutal, and it is unrelenting. Over the next 3 days, we will consider some of his critiques. He calls these religious leaders the blind leading the blind. He calls them whitewashed tombs. He says they strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. But his first criticism is the most basic. They don't practice what they preach. I'm sure you've heard that phrase, used it yourself probably. Don't we hate it when people do not practice what they preach? I mean, we hate people preaching at us about anything, really. But if there's any hint of a double standard in the preacher, we are outraged. We demand integrity and transparency. But this begs a question, a big question. What about Jesus? Here he is doing a lot of preaching. Well then, does Jesus practice what he preaches? Or is he a hypocrite like the rest? Well, think about it. Here is a preacher who commands, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who despise and persecute you. That's what Jesus preached in Matthew 5 verse 44. Did he practice it? You bet he did. Luke 23 verse 34 tells us, as they mocked, tortured, and killed him, he prayed, "Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing." With Jesus, there is an integrity and transparency beyond anything humanity has ever known. Jesus preached the highest standards imaginable, love for enemies, and yet he practiced those standards perfectly the whole of his life. His life matched his lips, and the whole world took note. You and I might hate hypocrisy, but even as we rail against it, we perjure ourselves, don't we? Knowing that we too wear masks, we too have double standards, we too go back on our word. Not Jesus. Not Jesus. Today, be astounded by the man without a mask. The Lord whose life and lips matched. The Savior who went all the way to the cross to practice what he preached.